Balance is at the core of every fighting game. Well, at least it should be. There's a reason why people's tier lists over the years have started to become more opinionated than objective. Fighting games are starting to get to a point where every character is viable, at the very least from a casual standpoint. And as a consequence, tier lists have become more diverse. Let's look at a classic matchup, Guile vs Zangief. It's pretty obvious that this matchup is in favor of Guile, as he can basically sit back and throw booms all day, especially with how much chip damage projectiles did back in the day. Fast forward to Street Fighter V, and that matchup is still in favor of Guile, but not nearly as unbearable as it was in Street Fighter II. Zangief now has more ways of dealing with projectiles. For example, he has armored moves, and his V-Trigger 1 pulls the opponent inwards, and you know grapplers love being up close. And with Street Fighter VI Universal Drive Rush mechanic, we'll probably see some surprise SPDs similar to what you can do with Potemkin. But my point is that it's in the developer's best interest to balance their fighting game, as doing so will encourage players to pick who they like, instead of picking who's the best. I gotta say, it's kind of discouraging to see a tournament where 7 out of 8 characters in top 8 are the same character. But then again, balancing is easier said than done, because the only way to make a fighting game truly balanced is for everyone to be the same character, which obviously is not an option when most franchises rely on having multiple characters, especially with those characters having distinctive archetypes. But as long as each archetype has tools to counter each other, the game will feel relatively balanced. But how do you balance this? A 2v1 is always unfair, right? Today, we're going to look at duos in fighting games and how developers choose to balance them. If you want to see more videos like this, then make sure to subscribe. It helps the channel out, and you can always unsub later. But first, today's video is sponsored by Top 11. Top 11 is a football management mobile game available on Google Play, App Store, Huawei, Microsoft stores, and web browsers. You're essentially in charge of managing a football club, and not just the team members. You're even in charge of things like creating the stadium your team plays in. Every aspect of the club is in your control. There are 4 major competitions that happen in every Top 11 season: the League Cup, the Champions League, and the Super League. This award-winning game has already been played by 260 million players worldwide and has a rating of 4.6 out of 5 stars with over 5.5 million reviews. Now is a good time to join because there will be lots of competitions and prizes during the season of Top 11 to celebrate this special time in football. So if you're ready to take your club to victory, click the link in the description to play Top 11 today. Thank you Top 11 for sponsoring, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of this video. There are primarily 4 different types of duo characters, and it's interesting to see the different ways they make these characters controllable by one person. The first way is by syncing both characters' moves, making them work as one entity. Now I know you're probably expecting the Ice Climbers to be on this list, but I want to mention a different pair of characters that you probably have never heard of. In an obscure game called Slap Happy Rhythm Busters, I know that's kind of a weird title, but as weird as the name sounds, it is pretty accurate. It's a fighting game with a rhythmic twist. You can do supers that do more damage with how many beats you hit. You can really tell this game was made in the 2000s with the overall aesthetic and the low poly visuals, but hey, I'm a really big fan of that. Among the roster, there are 2 characters named Vivian and Roxy. Vivian and Roxy both fight their enemies in unison, while piggybacking on each other. The only time they aren't like this is when they dash forward and switch positions. An advantage to this playstyle is that their moves extend further than others, as they can essentially use each other as weapons to hit their opponents. Enchantress from DNF Duel has a cool way of juggling between 2 characters. And before you say anything, I know DNF Duel has basically become obsolete, but that doesn't change the fact that her character concept was pretty interesting. In her normal stance, the bear follows her and acts like an assist, only attacking mainly during combos. But when you switch stances, the bear comes to the forefront, and now you mainly control the bear while Enchantress follows it. If you only want to control the bear, you can hold the guard button while you move. This mode works the best when used for setups or for pressure, and that's because the bear only has like 3 different attacks it can use, so a lot of your actual combos are coming from Enchantress. Because of her fighting style, she's one of the most technical characters in the game, and that makes sense because you basically have to keep track of 2 characters, but as a reward she has a plethora of tools to work with. The third archetype is the stand archetype. Now some people put stands under the umbrella of puppet characters, and while they are similar in terms of controlling a secondary entity, I believe there are significant differences. Stands are connected to the main character and basically act as extensions of them, which means they can disappear inside the main character and reappear whenever needed, whereas puppet characters will always have their secondary on screen. This archetype is probably the most popular on this list, and I say that because of how often stands are used in anime, and that prominence translates to fighting games as well. Every character in the JoJo series, Persona 4 Arena, even the game I showed you earlier, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters, has a character named Tom Tom who has a stand. But one specific character I want to focus on is Zato 1 from Guilty Gear. Zato is connected to this shadowy figure named Eddie. I find it funny how evil Eddie is compared to his name. Like, looking at him, you wouldn't expect his name to be Eddie. Zato is able to summon or retract Eddie at any time, and he can mold him to any shape he wants. The way Eddie moves reminds me a lot of Alessi's stand from JoJo's Heritage for the Future. You can position Eddie anywhere you want on screen, and you can also attack simultaneously as well. But make sure to keep track of his meter because it does deplete the more moves you use. Eddie will sometimes take over Zato during his moves, which grants him abilities like flight. And finally, the last type, the tag team archetype. This one is pretty self-explanatory. One character plays at a time and they're able to swap out each other at any moment, just like how you would in team games like Marvel vs. Capcom, Skullgirls, or even the upcoming game Project L. The only difference is that nobody can do it except for them. There are usually two ways games show which member of the team is actively fighting, which is a good thing because if they didn't do that, it would be hard to recognize who's attacking, especially if they're twins. The first way is by having the inactive character off screen. Maybe they disappear or walk away, but once the switch happens you can only see the character you're controlling. The second way is by having them in the background. Usually they're behind the active character and they're not in a fighting stance. Now you might be thinking that technically speaking, this isn't two characters, it's just one character that switches. And while that is kind of true, something that tag team characters can do that others can't is extend combos with their secondary character. And adding that element gives the player a significant wider range of tools to mix you up with. Okay, this part is kind of unrelated, but Hisui and Kohaku's moveset in Melty Blood is so bizarre. Like, I get they're maids, but I was expecting the gimmick to just be their weapons, but it goes so much deeper than that. You got plants being thrown, chairs and tables being swung. There's even a move Hisui has where she pours water and it actually does damage. Granted, it's not much damage, but if you pour it on Kohaku's plant, it turns into a tree that attacks 3 times, so that's kinda cool. Now with all the different types I've mentioned, how do you balance these types of characters? Because if you let both parts of the duo have full power like the rest of the cast, then it really does become a 2v1, which is unfair. In the case of tag team characters, this problem is kind of already solved since the other character can't do anything physically while tagged out. But for the other types, it really depends on the game. For example, in the case of stand characters like Zato, his weakness is having to recharge Eddie. So if you're able to hit Eddie and deplete his bar, Zato becomes very vulnerable without him. I will say that is a big if though, because it doesn't take long for Eddie to come back. For synced characters like the Ice Climbers or Vivian and Roxy, hitting one of them really means hitting both since their health bars are connected. Your opponent will have an easier time hitting you because they essentially have 2 targets. For puppet characters, the puppet is usually a lot weaker or very limited in what it can do compared to the main character. Sometimes it's the other way around, where they are forced to rely heavily on the puppet. Puppet characters also have to deal with having a second hurt box, as sometimes the puppet can take damage too. It's really interesting to see the range of how good or bad duo characters are, because sometimes they can be really good, and other times they're subpar. But again, like I said earlier, it really comes down to how the devs choose to nerf them. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what your favorite duo characters are, and comment down below if you have any that weren't in this video. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, join the Discord if you want to talk about long PB&J sandwiches, follow my Twitter for updates, check out my Twitch as well, and if you want to support the channel and get access to bonus content and other perks, you can head over to my Patreon. I hope you guys have a great day. Peace.